G'day mates, this is a little bit of a different video. I was actually contemplating to make it more of a highly produced video, but nah, not for this one. So, here I'm going to try and make the case why the Libertarian Party should nominate Donald Trump. Now, this is not for the sake of, Trump is a libertarian. No, he's not. The idea here is actually perfectly exampled with the crudely edited Stone Toss comic that I edited myself. Basically, the enemy of my enemy, you can consider it as a friend in this case, and I'm going to make that case. So, the reason why I went against making this a highly edited video was very simple. The nomination contest for the Libertarians is basically done, and they're nominating their candidate on May 24th through 26th, so that's in 2 months and a week, about that. So I wanted to make this case, let it be known to the party, and particularly if you stick around to the end of the video, or if you skip to the end, that's fine too, I suppose, though I would prefer the watch time. I'm proposing a list of concessions that you can put forth to the Trump campaign and simply say, hey, we're going to put you as Libertarian nominee, but we want these things. In the end, regarding political power, regarding political races like this, it's about getting things done. And if you have to make a deal with Trump in order to get some things going, well, that's a win. And that's exactly how you should treat it. You shouldn't treat everything in the political field as purely ideological, because if you do, you're not going to get anything done. You need to look at it from a pragmatic perspective. And that's what I'm bringing you. So, the case for Trump. I have a few things I want to talk about. Well, first, of course, is there precedent for this kind of methodology? Yes. Well, I'm going to talk about that first. Then I'm going to show you the accomplishments from a libertarian perspective. I'm a libertarian. However, I will be voting for Trump because, well, he's obviously the only realistic candidate that is above trash in comparison to anyone else that can win the Electoral College. That would be Biden. Well, I'd rather have Trump. So, the accomplishment of his term from 2017 all the way to 2021. That's it. The agenda for what he is proposing for his second term, so 2025 to 2029. The failures of Biden, benefits of an alliance ticket, and then proposed concessions for a deal. So let's start. Precedent. We have 4 instances in the presidential level where there's an alliance ticket. First, 1824 election, you had Andrew Jackson running as a Democrat nominee with Secretary of War John Calhoun as Vice President, pictured below. But at the other side, you had the National Republicans with John Quincy Adams, son of President John Adams. He picked the Secretary of War as well. You also had a 2 other presidential candidates, but they were not really significant. In the end, Jackson won the plurality of the vote, roughly 40% of the vote, roughly 40% of the Electoral College. However, that's not 50%, therefore contingent election, which Adams won. 1836, next example. The Whig Party was created during the midterms in the 1834 election, so this was during the second term of Andrew Jackson. They didn't hold a convention, and as a result, they had 4 tickets, easily distributed. So, for an example, Harrison and Webster, they were northern candidates. You had White and Mangum, they were southern candidates. For the northern ticket, you had Representative Francis Granger as the vice presidential nominee, and John Tyler, former senator from Virginia, he was the southern vice presidential nominee. Now, Tyler later on became president himself because his president died as a result. It's kind of ironic, but that was the next term later. So he was president from, 1841, something like that, 1842. Comes later. I'm making a documentary about that. Stay tuned, TM. 1896, William Jennings Bryan was nominated by the Democrats, the Populist Party, and the Silver Republicans because of a party split regarding the stance on the gold standard plus the silver standard. So Bryan proposed a economic philosophy called bimetallism, whilst the Republicans wanted to stay on the gold standard. So bimetallism essentially means you have a gold standard, but you also have a silver standard, which is an inflationary policy at that time. He lost, of course, to William McKinley. Next time around, 1900, yes, he ran again, was the nominee again, same three parties, but this time the anti-imperialist party rose up. This was due to the Guantanamo Bay purchase and the purchase of the Panama Canal Zone, so basically against the imperial movement. So those are the four tickets regarding presidential elections. We also have state elections where there's been plenty of times where an alliance ticket is formed. Every single cycle in New York, for an example, because you have the Republicans and the Conservative Party forming an alliance, and then you have the Democrats and the Working Families Party on the other hand forming an alliance. So it's not uncommon to have alliance tickets. That's set. Trump's accomplishment, splitting them up in 4 terms. Very important. Fiscal policy, I'm taking that separate from domestic and foreign. And then judicial appointments. So let's start with fiscal. Brief summary, and yes, this is kind of cherry picking because I'm not going to go through 4 years of legislation and executive orders and presidential proclamations because, let's be honest, it's now March 18th where I'm recording this, and I'm probably releasing it today as well. And I don't have time to start today and do 4 years of policy analysis when the nomination process is in 2 months. That's not reasonable. So, first of all, as a libertarian, I prefer that the 16th Amendment, which is the federal government can levy taxes, should be abolished, should be repealed in full. That's my belief. However, I don't think that's going to get done. So, getting tax cuts for every single bracket, or nearly every single bracket, is probably one of the best things that we can achieve. Which Trump did. So, basically every single bracket got a 3% cut. I'm going to show you that later with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because they have those numbers too. Next up, consumer confidence is the highest per presidential term in the 21st century. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because A, the measure is only starting since Jimmy Carter, and 2, the highest period was during the late 1990s, so Clinton's second term, which was basically with the dot-com bubble rising up, that we were in the high mood, and then that bubble bursted after the 2000 election, so during Bush's term. Lowest unemployment since 1970, and yes, I checked this, and I'll show you that later, because I also have the Federal Reserve category numbers in every single policy that I'm showing you, because I want you to double check it. I'm not one of those liars on MSNBC who just tells you something and you just gotta believe it. No, I'm giving you the numbers, I'm giving you the means to find them, to double check me. Energy independence. This simply means we produced more oil than we consumed, and therefore we were not importing any from other nations, which is very important for a nation essentially with a high military power. You need to be independent. If you're not, well, you got a problem. See pandemic, where we had to import medicine from a nation that was locked down. Well, of course, that's a big problem. This one is kind of, the last one, of course, is a little bit more of a anecdotal one, but payroll in the White House itself was reduced for all staffers, which is less costs. This is something that the president can do on his own. He doesn't need congressional approval for it. And the presidential salary, legally you're required to accept at least $1 from your salary, because Trump made one of his campaign pledges to not accept the presidential salary at all. Problem is, you're required to take at least $1. So what did he do? He accepted it, the salary, and then donated everything to charity, except for the $1 you're legally obliged to take. So that is something that no president has ever done, and you should take note on that. So, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. One of his main accomplishments, and is also one of the reasons why Senator Tim Scott decided that he wanted to try and run for the presidency. So, bottom left is the individual tax bracket. Top right is the married couples filing jointly bracket. So, I put everything in, well, bold letters in the case that anything changed. Well, it's not really that easy to see. I suspect that's because of the font, of course. So, I'm just going to quickly go through it. Brackets for the first two layers are unchanged. So, from 0 to $9,525. That stays the same. Same 10% rate as well. However, the next bracket, you get a 3% tax cut. So, you go from 15% to 12%. Next bracket, you go from 25 to 22%. However, the upper level is reduced from $93,700 to $82,500. Next bracket is also changed a little bit. However, you went from a 28% to a 24%. Then the fifth bracket, you went from 33 to 32. Sixth bracket stayed the same. Seventh bracket, you got from almost 40% taxes to 37%. Overall, it's all very much streamlined. Instead of having arbitrary numbers, you have more appealing looking ones. For an example, the sixth bracket went from 200,000 to 500,000. That's a little easier to read than 42,400. You get the point. Joint filings, basically you take the old ones, you multiply them by 2, that's your new bracket. Easy, right? Well, this in the case of Trump's tax reform. Under Obama's one, it's a little more odd. For an example, third bracket, 93,700. Well, if you multiply that by 2, you get a roughly 180,000. Well, that's not the case in Obama's tax reform in the third bracket, because then suddenly it's 156,000. So even in the joint filings, you still have the same as the single filings. What does this mean for you? Well, simple. I took a calculation from my previous salary, which was roughly $80,000 before I got fired for daring to get sick. I got roughly about 80,000, and the new Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that tax cut that I would receive was about 3%, because you're in the first 3 layers. First layer, you're not losing anything. In total, it was about 2,500 of tax cuts for me. Just plain income tax. That's already pretty good. Here's another few things that were added towards it. Doubling the child tax credit. That's good. Repealing the ACA mandate. So the Affordable Health Care Act. Basically saying you don't have to buy health insurance. That's already part of the reason why John Roberts ruled that Obamacare was suddenly constitutional, because they saw it as a tax. As long as it was mandatory, then you can enforce the healthcare laws. Well, they're no longer mandatory, and as a result, Obamacare itself is unconstitutional. Too bad the Supreme Court doesn't want to pick that issue up again. Corporate tax is also streamlined. So instead of having a branch deviated income tax for corporations between 15 and 35%, everything's went smacked at about 20%, or was it 21%? One of the two. So most companies saw a tax cut as well. State and local taxes, well, they were capped at $10,000, which means states that have higher income taxes, like New York, Massachusetts, California, Colorado, those states, you were allowed to deduct your state taxes from your federal one. But that was capped, which means that the wealthier individuals in those states were to pay more taxes, which is exactly the thing that the Democrats want you to do, but then do the exact opposite, of course, because it's all about optics. But when it comes to the actual legislation, well, they do the exact inverse of what they're supposed to do. Politics 101. So, when it comes to the new tax reforms under Biden, the state and local taxes was increased again, the deduction. So basically allowing the rich to pay less flat taxes, of course. So there's a little bit of mixed messaging here. Now, my personal opinion, I have to re-emphasize it. This number regarding taxation, every single bracket should be 0 in my opinion. But I don't think it's realistic. Leave it at that. Consumer confidence. So if you want to check it, you can go to the Federal Reserve Electronic Database. And this is all from the St. Louis website, which is basically what is compiling everything. Consumer confidence is noted as UMC Cent. So consumer sentiment. University of Michigan, consumer sentiment. Right? The average during Obama's second term was 83.7. And that number is essentially a percentage in comparison to the consumer confidence in December of 1966. That's where they took the baseline. And then they started measuring from Jimmy Carter. During Donald Trump's term, it was 92.8. But as you can see, that is including the COVID bump. And I'll show you in the next slide what it would look like without the COVID bump, or drought, if you want to call it something else. Biden, 67.3. So you can already see the consumer confidence is basically gone, and that is due to Biden's administration. This is a lot of numbers, but the only thing you have to look at is the color coding that I mentioned, that I'm putting here forth. Dark green is the best performing metric, of the best performing term in the metric itself. Light green is the second best performing. Yellow is the third best. Dark red is the worst performing. Red, second worst. Orange, third worst. Easy, right? In those categories, best performing gets 3 points. Worst performing gets -3. And you can guess what the rest is going to do as well. So, Carter, an average consumer sentiment during his term was 70%. Flat. Reagan's first term, 81.4. Reagan's second term, 93.1. This is the second best performing in the metric since we started measuring. Bush Sr., 82.1. Clinton first term, 90.4. Clinton second term, 105.3. So this was during the dot-com era. 90.4 for Bush Jr., his first term, 80.6 in the second term. Obama's first term, 70.8. Second term, 87.5. Trump, 92.1. However, if you exclude COVID, excuse me, that is 97.2, which would be the second best performing in US history, or at least since measurement, and Biden at 67.3. So, best performing, Clinton's second term. Second best, would be Trump excluding COVID. However, if you don't want to take that metric, that's fine. Then you can do Reagan's second term. In which case, then it would be Trump's term as the third best performing. That's fine too. That's the average. Standard deviation. This is a metric of the stability of the economy at that particular time. Carter, slightly under 9 points. Reagan, 13.3. And then 3.0. Which would be the best performing stability. Again, if you take COVID into account. Bush Sr., slightly under 10 points. Which would be the third worst performing. Clinton, 5.5. Clinton's second term, 3.6, which would be the second best performing. Bush, his first term, 5.2. Second term, 12.2, which would be during the Keating scandal. Obama, 6.2. Second term, 6.6. Trump, 8.8. That's due to COVID. If you exclude COVID, however, it's 2.6, which would be the most stable economy since measurement. Biden, 9.4. Apologies, I'm still a little bit sick. And I don't want to do anything in terms of production value for this. Because I'm lazy. And I don't want to add it. Because it creates a disingenuous view of an individual and how they are in their cadence and in their performance. And of course in the way that they speak. And their verbiage. Which is essentially creating a character that doesn't exist. Now, tangents aside. Next, I have the statistical analysis, which would be the 69, 95, 99 rule. Or in the case if you are aware with standard deviations, 1S, 2S, and 3S. Which simply I take the average, I subtract the standard deviation one direction, and I add it to the other, and that creates a range. So, what does this mean? Well, very simple. I put a color coding on it. Dark green, best performing, and in this case it's Clinton's second term all the way through. Reagan's second term, second term, apologies. That is the best performing in all those metrics. However, as you can see, they get kind of closer. Bush, same story. But what you can't see is because of the standard deviation, Reagan's term, his first one, is really becoming worse and worse if you keep the analysis over, and that's due to the standard deviation. So you kind of swing out of the oil crisis during Carter and that inflation crisis that caused it, and as a result you have a slightly less stable economy, naturally. So, now for the point value. Because Carter is the second worst performing in 3 metrics and the third worst in the 4th, gives him minus 7 points. Reagan has 3 categories in which he's one of the worst performing, and as a result he gets negative 6 points. His second term gets 11, but it would be 6 points if you take Trump's numbers without COVID into account. Which, in this particular case, it's the second best performing economy in terms of consumer sentiment and stability. And since we started measuring this, Bush Sr., negative 1 point. Clinton's first term, 0 points. Clinton's second term, 14 points. This is the best performing economy, at least in terms of consumer confidence, since measuring. Bush, his term, 4 points, which would be the third performing. However, if you take Trump without COVID, it would be 0 points. Bush Jr., negative 2 points. Obama's first term, negative 2. Obama's second term, 0 points. Trump, 1 point. And 11 if you exclude COVID, which would be number 2 spot. Biden is at negative 12, which is the worst performer in this category Period. Worse than Carter, who is the runner-up. Worse than Reagan's first term, who is the number 3. And it isn't even close, as you can see. -12 to -7. That's really bad. It's a really big landslide. So, next up, unemployment. This is also an important one. During Obama, 5.9% average during his entire term, with a labor participation rate averaged at 62.9% and a multiple job factor of 4.9%. Now, these categories, you can find them at the Federal Reserve for UN rate, civ part, so civilian participation, keep slurring words here apparently, and the last one is LNS 12026620. Those are the 3 metrics I used, and the only thing I did is take all these numbers here below, and then I simply said, let's average it out over the entirety of the term. January counts with the previous guy, just so you know. Trump, 5.0, 62.6%, 4.9% multiple job factor. However, this includes COVID. Yeah, I shouldn't have recorded this with influenza still running through my veins. Right. Should be a little better now. If you exclude COVID, it is 3.9% unemployment rate for Trump. And this little peak, oh, you can't really see it because I'm pointing with my finger. This little peak here, that is the lowest it has been. There's my cursor. That little point here is the lowest since 1970. Which I believe is roughly 3.2. You can check this, actually, if you want. It's February 2020. It's the lowest unemployment rate in US history since 1970. But I don't think they started recording this until like the late 60s. Participation rate actually went up to 63. Multiple job factor went slightly up by 5%. And here we go, Biden's term. Average unemployment 4.1%. But as you can see, it is now on the rise. At a later term, and it's kind of already the entire peak regarding COVID is gone. Before they even took office. Participation rate is at 62.2. And the multiple jobs factor is at 4.8%. And all those metrics, so the multiple job factor is actually increasing at the moment. I didn't put a chart for it in this, but you can check it at the LNS graph. It's actually going up now. I wanted to go over energy a little bit. This is the gas price on average of all US cities. And I think it's... so that's gas regular W, and I believe that's every city over 100,000 people is taken into this metric. So, Obama's second term, $2.85, with a standard deviation of 64 cents. Under Trump, that became $2.48 with a standard deviation of 27 cents, which is a price decrease of 13%. Then Biden comes in, now it's at an average of $3.50 over his entire term, with a standard deviation of 50%, which means it's a 41% increase in gas price during Biden's term. So if you want to look at your gas tank, you can definitely say Trump is a better guy for this. Utility gas, basically what you use in your home to cook. Cooking gas, you can also call it. Basically methane. For Obama, it was 99 cents per thermal unit. Standard deviation of 7 cents. Trump, it was $1.04. Under Biden, it is $1.44. But the only thing we can already see here is that the standard deviation with Trump's term is significantly lower. That is something you have to take into account because this is a cycle or a pattern that keeps repeating. Keep that in mind. So, for Trump, the price was about 5.6% higher than Obama's term. And Biden's term is about 38% higher than it is during Trump's term. Pattern emerging. Monkey brain activates. So, the metric we used here, APU 000072620. It's in the graph here in the header. You can pause the video if you want. You can go to the Fred website and you can just type it in. The exact number, you get the chart. You can do the same performances than I do. Simply put, take everything starting 2013 up until today and average it out per presidential term. Make sure you use standard deviation for a sample instead of a population because it does slightly different things in mathematics. Just so you know. Electricity. Obama, 13.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Trump, basically the same. However, if you look at the decimals behind, so at the 4th or the 5th decimal, it was a slight increase, 0.6%. Basically the same price, but who cares? Standard deviation, however, was halved, which means a more stable electricity grid. Joe Biden, 15.7 cents per kilowatt hour, and the standard deviation went up 6 times. For an increase in energy price, for electricity price by 15%. Boom. Here's food. Federal Reserve doesn't really take into account many food items because they only use the top 25 consumed items. So in this particular case, I went with 5 animal-based products. I went with 2 or 3, if you want to take milk into account. The most consumed beverages, bread is also important, and then 4 of the most used vegetables, or in the case of tomato, it would be fruit. Consumed. So, metrics usually is in pounds or in gallons in the case of liquids, except for coffee grounds, so the coffee beans themselves, that's measured in pounds. Soft drinks is measured in 2-liter bottles, so that would be roughly 67 ounces. And eggs are measured per dozen. Now, I don't want to go through every single one here, because that's kind of not the point here, because I'm going to be reading basically every number here. I just want to point you to the standard deviation. Ground beef, the supply line regarding it was best under Trump, so it went from 31 cents under Obama to 22 cents under Trump and then back to 34 for Biden's term, so it's more stable supply. Bacon, same story, from 33 cents to 22 and then to 48. Kind of pattern emerging here. So, I just want to mention the color codes here. Green is the price of the particular item was reduced by 5% or more during the term itself. Yellow, it's between a 5% increase and a 5% increase, so basically it's not really noticeable. And red would be the prices have gone up by more than 5%. So, ground beef, under Biden it's up 24 points at the moment, so that's in comparison to Trump's average. And we're not talking the best of Trump or the worst of Trump, we're just saying the average of everything. So from $3.83 to $4.76. And you can check that with APU 00007 0.003112. That's the chart you want to look at, because this takes into account all US cities. Every single one of these charts does. I'm not doing regional things like, oh, only New England or only the Pacific region. No, everything is taken into account here. Bacon went from $5.62 under Trump per pound to $6.88 under Biden. You can check this with APU 0000704111. Chicken breast per pound from $3.13 under Trump, which was an 8% decrease from Obama, to now $4.03 per pound under Biden. That is a 28.6% increase. You can check this with APU 0000 Foxtrot 1101. Eggs per dozen from Obama $2.12 per dozen to Trump $1.53 per dozen, which is a 25% increase roughly, or decrease, to Biden $2.49, which is a 63% increase of eggs prices per dozen. You can check this APU 0000708111. Milk per gallon. Under Obama, $3.44. Under Trump, $3.12 per gallon, which is a almost 10% decrease. Under Biden, it's $3.90 for a 25% increase in price. You can check this APU 0000709112. Now this next one is a new metric introduced, hence the asterisk. We started measuring this in 2018. This is soft drinks per 2-liter bottles. Trump, $1.58 per gallon average. And under Biden, it's more than $2, 28% increase. However, you can also see that the standard deviation for this one has tripled under Biden. You can check this APU 0000 Foxtrot November 1101. Coffee grounds, and the reason why there's an asterisk here is because during the Trump term there were some months that this wasn't measured. Because what the Federal Reserve does is it measures the 25 most purchased items. And yes, in some months coffee wasn't the 25th most, wasn't among that list of 25 items that were purchased. Surprise, surprise. It even surprised me. So, from $4.88 under Biden or under Obama to $4.39 under Trump, which is roughly a 10% decrease. However, some months weren't measured, so we don't know if it's actually 10%. Under Biden, it's $5.64, which is a 28% increase. You can check it with APU 0000717311. The last 5 items: bread, $1.40 under Obama to $1.35 under Trump, which is essentially a negligible price decrease, to now $1.75 under Biden. That's a 30% increase. You can check this yourself, APU 0000702111. Last 4 items: tomatoes, lettuce, bell peppers, and potatoes. And for tomatoes and lettuce, there were some months that weren't measured. So we can see that the price for vegetables and fruit has gone up regardless of who is president. This may have to do something with the Department of Agriculture when it comes to particular legislative approvals. For an example, ethanol farming to dilute your diesel with. So, the only metric in which Biden is performing better is tomatoes. in which case it went from $1.93 under Trump to $1.91 under Biden, so that's a 1% decrease. APU 0000712311 for tomatoes. Lettuce, you can check it with APU 0000 Foxtrot Lima 2101. Bell peppers, they stopped recording it in 2019. So I just wanted to show you this. It's a metric you can check if you want. But I'm not going to mention the name here because of course it's not really relevant in the checkup here. Potatoes, basically bread and butter of every single family. A lot of consumption. I know that in my family. From 67 cents per pound under Obama to 76 cents under Trump to 90 cents under Biden per pound. So that's a 13.7% increase and then a 19% increase in Biden's term. APU 0000712112. So as you can see, with Biden, every single thing went up. And yes, the reason why I put tomatoes in here is because I literally was searching for one thing that was positive for Biden. Because I didn't want to look really anti-Biden here. Funny how that works. Domestic policy. So, one of the main issues that really swung my support towards Trump, and I was a Rand Paul kind of guy in the 2016 primary, is the Online Sex Trafficking Prevention Act, full stop, and the SESTA Act, which is combined into it. So basically it's an act of the federal government which cracks down on human trafficking. This is one of the main issues why I supported Trump in 2020. And why I continue to support him, because of his Agenda 2024, or Agenda 47, I don't know what he's calling it these days. Because he's pledging on doubling down and expanding upon this policy. So I'm already liking it. Let's give more. An additional crackdown on drug cartels and violent gangs, which is necessary because when it comes to violent crime, particular murder, more than half of it is done by gangsters and drug cartels, so that is where the crime is, and you need to target that particular crime. He's also capable of reducing illegal immigration. He's done that in a tremendous fashion. We went from about 1 million illegal immigrants under Obama to about 300,000 per year under Trump. That's already pretty good. Needs to go to zero, but that's a different story. I'll explain that to you later. A lobbying ban was introduced for anyone that wanted to work in the Trump White House. It should be a federal law to ban lobbying, period. However, considering 90% of Congress is doing this, good luck getting it past committee and then voting in the House of Representatives. You don't really get that done. Renegotiating NAFTA and ending the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Well, here's a little thing that libertarians may not agree with me upon it, but free trade isn't good for the workers of the nation that you're trying to support. You can't get elected without the support of your working class, and NAFTA is something that actively harmed the American worker. News came out today. Tyson Food Company in Dallas County, Iowa, so that's west of Des Moines, they announced that they would be firing about 2,000 employees, and they had the intention of replacing them with 40,000 illegal immigrants. That's why you need to stop illegal immigration, because it's not about losing American workers. The issue is laws only need to be enforced against American people. So when you have a minimum wage law that says you have to pay a worker $12.50. That only counts for Americans. An illegal immigrant, you can pay him $5. And if he dares to call the police, you just call ICE and say, oh yeah, I think I got a bunch of illegals working here. Could you do a raid and deport them? And the funny thing about this is, if you do it before paycheck day, you don't even have to pay their paychecks. So essentially it's free labor. That's why these companies do it. And that is coincidentally also why the Democrat and the Republican Party haven't fixed the immigration issue. Because it's the corporations, in this particular case, with these kind of unethical practices, that keep the system going. So that is something that the Libertarian Party needs to adjust itself on, because if you want to be elected, you don't need to perform policies that are actively against your own people. And it's the same thing with immigration. You're decreasing the wages of your worker class. You're also making it more difficult for people to buy homes, find homes in the first place. And I'm going to show you this later. There's also an additional pressure on the financial system. Trump also decentralized the education system, which means reverting it to the 10th Amendment position, which is every single state can make their own educational decisions, as it should be. Fun fact: Ronald Reagan ran on getting rid of the Department of Education. And he almost got it done. If a certain senator from Arizona didn't stab him in the back. Senator John McCain. Now, fast forward 25 or so, 20 odd years later, 30 technically, to Trump saying, I want to end Medicare, or what was it? The Obamacare Act. So the Medicare expansion, or whatever they called it. I want to end it. John McCain said, sure, bring it to the Senate and we'll get it done. What does John McCain do on the Senate floor? He votes to maintain Obamacare. You know, that one thing that he literally campaigned upon in his own presidential election? No, it was just screw Orange Man. That was the reason why McCain voted against it. And why he voted against Reagan. Funny how that works, right? Furthermore, this was a very important one, and apparently it popped up for a lot of people that wanted DeSantis regarding the ESG stuff. But guess what? DeSantis just took it from Trump, as he did with every single other particular policy that he really liked. Trump, with an executive order, banned the federal government from investing in anything stock market related regarding ESG. Now, if you know anything about the stock market, if your company is labeled on the stock market, guess what? You have to be ESG compliant. That's how it works these days. So, you want to read it? Executive Order 13868, Section 5. That is the federal ESG investment ban, which immediately was repealed by Joe Biden upon entering in office. Guess why? Alright, illegal immigrations. Let's go a little bit deeper into the numbers. Tax revenue. All these numbers that I'm labeling here on the left side of the screen. So you have three tables. The top one is revenue, center one is expenditure, and then the bottom one is just balance overall. All those numbers are in billions of dollars. Not millions, billions. So federal tax revenue, $24.6 billion, roughly. Tax credits, $8.4 billion, roughly. So a net tax revenue from illegal immigrants on the federal level, $16.2 billion. State taxes, roughly $15.2 billion. And that is a total tax revenue from illegal immigrants, brings it to $31.4 billion after credits. Expenditure, however, on the federal level, For education, $6.6 billion for illegal immigrants. State level, $73.2 billion for illegal immigrants, for a total of $79.8 billion of educational spending for illegal immigrants. Medical expenses, $23.1 billion on the federal level, $18.6 billion on the state level, for a total of $41.8 billion for illegal immigrants. Justice enforcement, so that's essentially border control, ICE, DHS funding, that kind of stuff. $25.1 billion on the federal level, an expenditure of $21.8 on the state level, to a grand total of slightly below $47 billion. Welfare spending, $11.6 billion roughly for illegal immigrants on the federal level. State level, slightly below $2 billion, for a $13.5 billion total. So federal spending is roughly $66.5 billion in total. State spending roughly $115 billion, $115.6 billion. Grand total, $182 billion that we spend on illegal immigration. Which brings us to a net balance total. On the federal level, a net loss of $50 billion due to illegal immigration. On the state level, a net loss of $100 billion. For a grand total of $115.6 billion that we lose every single year because of illegal immigration. Now, these numbers are from the Department of Treasury for each individual state and the federal government. And they are all compiled by the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and you can find that on their website. So fair.org, and then you have the projects where you can just look at it. They have a neat little fact sheet for each individual state, which I'll show you later because they only compile the expenses per household. Apply that to this sheet as well, or this slide pack. So, there are currently 11 sanctuary states and 1 sanctuary district. In the Northeast, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont are considered sanctuary states, which means they will not comply with federal law enforcement regarding illegal immigration. So, no compliance with DHS and ICE regarding deportation. Illinois is also sanctuary state. Washington, D.C. is sanctuary district. And then California, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington are sanctuary states. Here we have the neat little chart per state. So, this is dollars per household that you spend every single year on illegal immigration. In the state of California, it's more than $2,000 that your family loses because of illegal immigration. This is medical expenses. This is educational expenses, welfare, those kind of things. So, then there are 3 states that are higher than $1,500, which would be Nevada, New Jersey, and I believe the next one is Massachusetts. This is really funny. I did it in gradients of red, and I'm colorblind, so I can't really read this chart. Natural -1 perception for me. You can check these numbers for your state as well, but this is essentially a lot of money that you're spending out. So, if you want, you can pause the video, you can check your home state, and you can see, oh, how much money am I losing out on illegal immigration for? And in the case of West Virginia, for example, it's about $100. And $100 is a nice little family dinner. So, imagine every single year going out with your family 1 extra time. That's how you should look at it. Or in the case of California, it's about 1 month of rent. Alright, foreign policy. This is probably one of the reasons why Trump is to be considered at least better than everything of his competition. especially in the Republican Party. First off, no new wars. And I can't emphasize this enough, no new wars. No more of the warmongering bullshit that was under Bush or McCain or Romney or DeSantis for that matter. With Trump at the head of the Republican Party, you don't have to worry about this warmongering bullshit. And if Trump did declare a war, I wouldn't be making this video because I would have actively been making videos against Trump. Just so you know, if that guy starts a war, I'm out. Done. Point 2. Destruction of ISIS. This is very easily to accomplish because the only thing you have to do is tell the Pentagon and the CIA, stop losing weapons in the Middle East. Because that's how Al-Qaeda became big, that's how the Mujahideen became big, that's how the Taliban became big, and that's how ISIS became big. Because we lose weapons so that they can fight against their government. That's how it worked. That's the neoconservative, neoliberal foreign policy. Furthermore, significant progress regarding establishing a permanent peace in North Korea. North-South Korea, basically, that Korean peninsula. Here's the thing. The Korean War officially is still going. The only thing that's changed is we have what is called a ceasefire. A sort of permanent ceasefire. We should intend to make that ceasefire a peace deal. So we end the hostilities. That should be the goal. Trump managed to get us into that direction. However, Biden screwed it up again. Trump is the only US president to have stepped foot into North Korea, period, and then without security detail. That takes some balls to do. Simple as. Abraham Accords. This ended hostilities between Israel and 6 other countries in the Middle East and North Africa. Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Sudan, and Oman. So technically, sorry, that's 5 nations. Those ended all their hostilities with Israel, making it a more peaceful world in that particular region. And I don't care that some people are going to be complaining by, oh yeah, he just bribed those nations into accepting Israel. Don't care. They don't want to kill him anymore. That's good enough for me. Print some blood money to basically say, hey, if you stop killing those people, you get this money. Okay, that's fine with me. Because there's less blood to be spilled. That's already a good start. He ended the violent conflict between Serbia and Kosovo, although that is now rekindling again thanks to Biden. And the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The initial negotiations were good, but you know, of course what Joey did to screw it up. So, judicial appointments, about 150 federal judges. There's not really anything remarkable going on there, but 3 Supreme Court judges. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett. Now they each have their pet peeve issues. And some of them I don't agree with. Some of them I do agree with. That's fine. Everyone has their own opinions. Everyone has their own rulings. I'm okay with that. But the 2 cases that I really am, not really concerned, but satisfied with, is Bruen and Dobbs. And in the case of the Bruen decision, 6-3, with all 3 of Trump's nominees voting in favor. Without them, this case wouldn't have even been brought to the Supreme Court. So the Bruen case, which basically made every single piece of gun control unconstitutional, it wouldn't have happened without Donald Trump. That needs to ring through. Because the Bruen precedent has been used, because I already know you're going to call out the bump stock ban, Bruen makes the bump stock ban unconstitutional. which may... That's the funny part, because this particular precedent got rid of most of the gun control. And yes, I think the Supreme Court does need to take up a few more of these gun control cases and basically say, yeah, we were a little unclear about these particular things. That needs to be changed. Now, Dobbs is another one, which basically was the case that throughout Roe v. Wade, the conservative lobbying and fundraising giant bomb that the Republicans have used since the 70s to try and get elected, Trump got it accomplished. 5-4 decision. All three of Trump's nominees voted to repeal Roe or overrule it. Now, this is a little more of a contentious issue within the Libertarian Party. Believe me, I know. But I am on the pro-life side of the issue. Which means I think the Dobbs ruling, the way it did, was exactly what we needed. So, that's already another reason for me to simply say, please consider this. Agenda 47, this is basically a compilation of Donald Trump's peak policy positions. You can go to his website and his campaign website, and there's this neat little chart of video statements and video policy coins that he tosses up regarding everything. So, the first one, the first video he ever made was the Free Speech Policy Initiative, which essentially is a digital Bill of Rights. One of the main reasons why I immediately said, well then, in for a penny, in for a pound, here I go. Here I go endorsing Trump again. So, that is already one of the key positions where I'm saying, yes, we gotta do this. And that and the rest of the field in the presidential election is just terrible this year. I don't know how we keep getting bad politicians. Federal parental rights legislation. Basically, the Glenn Youngkin strategy and the Ron DeSantis strategy in Florida. Take that, put a national bill in front of Congress, and that's it. So taking the win from the particular position there. Another one is to attempt, at least, or hopefully succeed, to broker a peace deal with the current European conflict and the Middle Eastern conflict. I don't think that I'll be able to get this video monetized anyway, so I may as well just mention it. Ukraine-Russian war and the Israel-Palestinian how to phrase this without offending anyone. Let's call it a riot. Because that's what it essentially is. Basically, Trump has already made his position noticeable. We gotta get the killing to stop. And then we can move on to establishing a resolution to the conflict. That's what's needed. A return to energy independence, of course. Continuing the fight against the communist ESG. I almost want to say it ELG, but what the fuck is that? Now, ESG, that entire kerfuffle, they have attempted to rename it. Just keep in mind, this kind of corporate communist bullshit will be continued to be fought against. But Donald Trump has also said, okay, I've now realized the US government is filled with communists. Joseph McCarthy was right. And we will root out these communists. And finally, continue the fight against human trafficking. And if you want to continue the fight against human trafficking, the best way to start is vote for Trump. Why? Here's the failures of Biden. We already had the record inflation that we already showed you with the food pricings. But here's another one. Record illegal immigration facilitated by the Biden administration. What is Joe Biden doing? He's flying people from the South, once they're in, to northern states, or Midwestern states, or Pacific states, or southern states. Basically, distributing it all over the country. And why do you do that? It's for votes. That's it. It's the amnesty plan from Ronald Reagan, but on steroids. That's essentially what is the plan for the Democratic Party. They don't believe they can win elections, so let's import people that will vote for us. That's the entire Democrat strategy right now. This includes also children. And yes, many of these people that are being trafficked by the Biden administration, all expenses paid for by the Biden administration, by the way, they're sex slaves. That is what Biden is facilitating here. So you want to stop human trafficking? Let's start with getting Biden out of the White House. And getting Alejandro Mayorkas out of that position. Straight to jail. Or in the case if you don't like prisons, maybe a helicopter ride without a parachute might be my alternative suggestion here. Third position. Trump established, with Foster and Sesta, a task force within the FBI and the Department of National Intelligence specifically dedicated to combating human trafficking. What did Biden do? Day one of his administration. He took all the resources from that new task force and put it into combating, right here, white supremacy. Which means America. Here's a thing that many of you don't know, but should know. A communist is using the code word white supremacy to mean anything that doesn't fall in the worldview of Marx. That's why they call the Electoral College white supremacy. That's why they call being on time white supremacy. That's why they're calling profit white supremacy. Because it's fighting against the very structure of our society. Keep this in mind. The Democratic Party today is filled with a bunch of communists. You want an example of this? Sure, I'll give you one. The Weather Underground was a communist group in the 1960s and 1970s bombing federal buildings. Ringleader Bill Ayers was a political mentor of Barack Obama. Bill Ayers was serving life in prison for his involvement with the Weather Underground until President Bill Clinton pardoned every single Weather Underground member in his final days in the White House in January of 2000. You know why he did that? Well, it was because Representative Gerald Nadler, New York's 10th district, so that's Manhattan, he just went to the White House and said, maybe you should pardon these communists that wanted to overthrow this country. Would be pretty fun, right? And you know what these communists did? Instead of, reforming the Weather Underground, which was banned by the which was banned by the government, they formed different organizations like Black Lives Matter, which became prominent in the 2013 post-repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act, which banned propaganda. In the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013, it became legal to broadcast propaganda upon the American people. Thanks, Obama. This time it's unironically. So, that's why I'm saying the US government, particularly the Democratic Party, is filled with communists. Because it's true. Biden is also using the FBI to target Catholics that are opposed to abortion, which, means Catholics. Parents who decided that they don't want their children to be taught pornographic material in middle school or kindergarten or grade school. Kind of important, not giving pornography to kids. Apparently, the FBI is now being instructed to target these people. He's also using the FBI to arrest journalists that are debunking narratives of the Biden administration, particularly against their famous and most beaten horse in the modern history, which would be the January 6th riot. Of course, the FBI is now also targeting individuals that enjoy video games, because video gamers are against ESG, therefore they are against the communist New World Order, and the FBI, of course, is directed by the communist president to attack. So, the last one, I'm using the FBI here for the bullet point, but it's actually the ATF. The ATF is targeting FFLs, and they're doing it in such a disgusting way that it takes away your license, and therefore anyone that is attached to your license, they can't get their guns anymore. What they do is simply they check your paperwork. If they find a single typo, oh yeah, your paperwork's not in order, there goes your license. That's what the ATF is doing today. Dot your I's, cross your T's, because the ATF is going after you. Biden also expanded the IRS with 47,000 agents, including a task force that is carrying weapons. I don't know why a tax collector needs weapons. That's what the police department is for. But, so, I'm already of the opinion that taxation should be illegal and the IRS should be disbanded. Biden goes ahead and adds 47,000 people to it. Here's another fun thing about this. And this is one of the reasons why Kevin McCarthy is no longer in the House of Representatives. Fuck that guy. The Republicans promised to get it done, to get rid of the IRS expansion. And they were kind of lukewarm about it, and I don't think they even managed to get it passed. I'm not forgiving them for that. Which is also the reason why I'm now announcing that I will not be voting Republican down ballot. I just vote Trump and then leave the rest either blank or Libertarian down ballot, provided there is a Libertarian nominee. Final one is the botching of the withdrawal in Afghanistan, killing 13 servicemen and leaving $80 billion in equipment. This particular failure should have resulted in the impeachment and removal of Joe Biden. Not by Congress, but by the military. The Commander-in-Chief of the Army, the Armed Forces, so the Council, so the leader of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, they should have just come together and say, this guy got service members of our skills, he needs to go. And then have the General of the Army, Commander of the Army, just take 1,000 troops, march to the White House and said, Mr. President, you're fired. And just launch him out of a cannon into the sea. Just do that. I am more in favor of a Highline-style republic, which basically means you fail at your task, you resign. Accountability. Right? That's one of the main core tenets that a democracy should revolve around. Now, of course, politicians, they don't want to be held accountable because, of course, they're allergic to that stuff. Enough tangents. Previous election. As you know, a popular argument that was made on the Republicans was, oh, well, Donald Trump would have won re-election if the Libertarians didn't take enough voters from us. Here's a little problem. Have you considered that these libertarians may not even want to vote Republican? So, and the reason for this video is an alliance system. If an alliance was established in the 2020 election, it would have been 269 to 269. That's a fact. Republicans had control of the House in terms of delegations, and thus Donald Trump would have been re-elected in literally the most narrow election possible. Furthermore, there are also 5 Senate elections in the past 20 years that would have flipped results if an alliance structure was made. For an example, John Tester would not be in the Senate right now. It would have been either Conrad Burns or Danny Rayburg, and I would prefer Rayburg in this particular card. Burns, he is kind of a, or I should say, was a really peculiar character. Kind of your typical Confederate style rancher. I shouldn't laugh, but it was really... I recently re-listened to one of his statements, and it was just... What the fuck was this guy smoking? Just full Confederate speak. Glued at the N-word was fucking hilarious. Rayburg would have been senator as well. If you don't like Joe Manchin, he wouldn't have been elected either. Would have been Patrick Morrissey in that particular regard. In Georgia, you wouldn't have had communist John Ossoff, or if you want to use his birth name, Thomas Ossoff. He wouldn't have been senator, and neither would the alleged child molester Raphael Warnock, because then it would have been Herschel Walker as senator. Thank you, Chase Oliver, who is now running for the Libertarian presidential candidate for the nomination. So, I wanted to show you this, the House election in 2020. Here's the outcome. Now, what it does here is I show you who has the majority of the delegation. Now, in the case of Minnesota, it was 4-4 Republican. In the case of Michigan, it was 7-7 Republican-Democrat. In the case of Pennsylvania, it was 9-9. Which brings us to the delegation potential vote. These 3 states, because they have an even delegation, they don't get to participate in the contingent election. 27 Republican states, 20 Democrat states in the majority. And in the case of Arizona, you may think, huh? What was that? Yeah, they had 5 Democrats in Congress and 4 Republicans. So that's why now it's 6-3 Republican because of the redistricting. So this is the delegations. That's why Trump would have been re-elected. You only need 26 delegations in order to get it done. So, final proposition, the proposed concessions for a deal. And I'm basing this on the 2020 the election as well, right? So, in trade for an alliance ticket, the Libertarian Party, and this is why I want the leadership to even see this video, gets A, for the alliance itself, the position of Secretary of Treasury. The main concern of the Libertarian Party was fiscal issues when it was incepted in 1971. It was regarding the gold standard. We got off and the fiat currency was introduced. That's why the Libertarian Party was created. So if you want to tackle the budgetary deficit and the national debt, this is the best way to do it. Alliance ticket, make sure that the Secretary of Treasury is a Libertarian. And then you can come in and basically just slash everything. I propose the Larry Elder amendment, which would be capping the federal tax revenue at 10% of the GDP, which would be $3 trillion. Capping the spending of the federal government at 9% of the GDP, which would be $2.7 trillion. So a mandatory budgetary surplus of $300 billion every year. So that would be $300 billion you can either use in emergency management, so hurricanes, flash floods, forest fires, tornadoes, that kind of stuff, to pay for the damages there. Or you can just simply say we use $300 billion every single year to pay off the national debt. One of the two. Additionally, you can use a suspension methodology here to build into the amendment to simply say, okay, in the case of a national debt, we can keep the revenue rate as is, which would be $4.7 trillion. But all the additional extra spend or extra revenue can only be used to pay off the debt. And in the case of if the nation declares war, then you can overrule the spending cap. So if we are attacked, for an example, then we can say, okay, now we can spend more in terms of defense spending. That's how I would solve the budget. So, if you want to put me forward for Secretary of Treasury, go for it. That would be funny. Alright. Based on the 2020 results, it would have been 4 races that would have flipped. Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, and the Senate race in Georgia. 4 positions that would have flipped. Which means, rule number 2, for each additional state flipped due to libertarian votes, as part of the alliance agreement, which includes all down ballot elections, 1 additional cabinet member. So, 5 cabinet members would have been libertarians if this deal was made in 2020. I would recommend a healthy split of members and officials. Why is that? Members are heads of departments, which must be confirmed by Congress. However, officials, in most cases, they don't. They can just be appointed. Chief of Staff, for an example, doesn't require a congressional vote. CIA Director, for an example, does. And the CIA was a part of the cabinet, the director. Now I would propose, because I want to see every single gun control policy to be rescinded, I would propose elevating the director of the ATF to a cabinet official, and then simply say, the new director must be a libertarian. And the libertarian director of the ATF would just basically sit on his ass and say, oh, we're not going to enforce any of these laws. That would have been the perfect ATF director. I don't think he can get away with that, because the Democrats in Congress would just riot over it, but it would be hilarious. So that's kind of my healthy thing, right? So you want the CIA, for an example, to be completely toothless? Well, guess what? The new CIA director is the libertarian, who simply says no to every single covert operation that they want to perform. Done. So there's things like that. You can do that. You can also say like Health and Human Services. Put a libertarian in there. Or you could put the Department of Labor, a libertarian in there, or even Defense Secretary of Defense. You can put him in there. That's fine. That's up to the party itself to decide. Kind of in agreement with the Trump campaign, I suppose. The next 3 is basically key policy positions within the Libertarian Party. And the reason why I'm adding these 3 is because Trump is already susceptible to these, and he's already willing to go towards this direction. So you may as well just say, okay, let's formalize it and get it done. Additional withdrawal from foreign theaters. So basically, any military base in which we are not welcome, we bring our equipments home, we bring our boys home, we close the base. For example, East Syria, or Iraq, or the bases in Libya, or in Yemen, or in Oman. Get rid of those bases, bring everyone back home. I think we could get many, if not all, libertarians to agree on this particular position. The 4th one, constitutional carry. And yes, there are already 27 states in the Union that have passed constitutional carry provisions. Why not make it federal law? I think we can get it done. Last one is removing marijuana from Schedule 1. So this is the Controlled Substances Act. What Schedule 1 does is if you have this particular substance, it takes away your right to own a gun. Which is why Democrats are pushing for medical marijuana cards to be available, free and that kind of stuff. Because this is a way for them to get rid of the Second Amendment. Because if you have a medical marijuana card and you go to a gun store to buy a gun, they just look at it and say, oh, in the background check it says you cannot have narcotic substances or Schedule 1 substances. Weed is a Schedule 1, therefore you can't own a gun. Background check denied, you're done. Permanently. That's why they put weed in here. So, removing marijuana from Schedule 1 makes it so that anyone that has a medical marijuana card can now buy a gun. This should be the one policy in which you push Republicans. And this should definitely be a part of the agreement. Well, this was my TED Talk. Nice, it's almost within 90 minutes. Basically a full-time movie. Ha! Funny. Alright, so 90 minutes, this is my proposed deal. And I'm definitely going to send this video or hyperlink to this video out to the Libertarian Party. Just say, hey, put it in the background while you're making a meal. Just listen to it. Let me hear what you think of this thing. It's probably going to be a shot in the dark with no tracers, looking at a purely black figure trying to shoot it down. That's basically what this video is, but you know, it's what my dad always used to say: if you don't fire, you will always miss your target. So, hopefully you enjoyed this video. A lot of rambling, a lot of talking, I know. Pretty good, 90 minutes of talking without any form of script whatsoever. I like it. Thank you kindly for watching, and have a great day. Cheers.